first told me to talk about data deprivation or data apartheid, I thought about it like this is actually indeed a challenging time when we talk about data, specifically the section of data that I work on in CPR which is macro statistical data. I mean, everybody is following for the past a few months that the data landscape in our country, it's been the center of several debates. Government say people fudging numbers, institution fudging numbers, they come back and government fudging numbers back. So what's happening? I mean, what exactly I'm saying that we have a very established, statistical systems, and I would try to highlight on that India has a nice history of macro statistical system. We have a census going on since 1871, which is one of the longest history in the world. And we have several government surveys, deals on employment, unemployment, poverty, urbanization, a lot of socioeconomic issues that are still there since 1950 and a stable source. But till then, why do we, even we have this very strong structure, why do we face this sort of apartheid? So I picked together a couple of issues. Go next. So I think these are worth highlighting in terms of decoding the nature of data apartheid or data deprivation, however we quote it, talk about. There is a conflicting claims that's the most known rhetoric these days. And a lot of that is dependent on how we define data and how complex it is and how information people collect, they interpret and they disseminate. So from the starting from the collection, analysis and interpretation of data, one can interpret it in various ways and talk about it in various ways that often leads to conflicting claims. The second part is more about, we have a various large pool of data. It's not only government public data, there is a lot of host of private data, there's political data, there's demographic data, there's socioeconomic data. They are vastly unequal in terms of, if we want to just pull them together and do some sort of insightful analysis. And often that even generates to conflicting claims. And the third thing I think is one of that creates the shortage is the nature of speciality of the data. A lot of data that we look at very macro and stuff, and the kind of stuff that people talked about for the morning is that often is often accused that this thing is unable to capture a lot of these things. So I'm basically trying to highlight these three things with three small stories. Go ahead. So the first one is the hidden data. So this particular thing that I'm showing here is about a table about female workforce participation in India. What is the share of females who work, who actually work within 15 to 59 years age group? What you can see is that this number varies in rural areas from 5% to 46%, urban areas 5% to 24%, and there's a whole bunch of numbers there showing various different sorts of numbers. So that's the first example of my conflicting claims. If you want to quantify women's work in India, you probably land up in 5-6 different kinds of numbers. But these 5-6 different kinds of numbers comes from what? How do you define it? So for example, if we break this journey from 5% to 41%, for example, we'll get within that number, this 36% women do different sort of work. So this graph at the right hand side shows women's work in terms of how much time they employ in terms of work throughout the year. So you can see that a way you interpret this, some surveyor goes and some particular surveyor wants to define it in terms of 3 months, you will get one number. Some surveyor wants to get more than 8 months of work as work, you will get a very tiny number called 4.9%, which is the blue at the top in the rural areas. Some surveys say, oh no, I'm good, I don't need a full-time 8 months job, I just need for 3 months. You will get a number of 10.6% or something in that the 22% or 30% number in that sense. So how do you quantify, how do you get it? And often our macro data says that work in this country is not very similar in that page when how they define work, for example. That's why you often get ministry saying, no, we have a lot of general formal sector employment for last 1 year, and our government's own survey contradicts that not formal sector job has been generated that way. And it also hides a lot of information. This is an issue of hidden data as well, that probably if a person goes for a woman's work and not capturing work that is for less than 3 months. A lot of informal sector work of women may not get captured. So that's one caveat. Go next. The second thing is the issue of absent data. We talk about hidden and absent. So there are two maps. One map shows that it's a national capital region of Delhi, Delhi NCR region. It's a cross-state region. One shows the share of SC population across Delhi, NCR. We do it at the left at the district level. It's very easily available from census. We can plot it. But if we try to do that at political constituency level, we can say PC, which is the Lok Sabha constituency level, we can't really do that. Because you see that the red boundaries in the right hand side map, those are PC boundaries, and the black are the district boundaries. And there are no relationship among those. And when election commission comes up with these things, if one needs to reconstitute those numbers from the scratch, it's nowhere possible because in our government data system, we don't have, most of the cases doesn't have a linkage that allows us to match these things. That again leads to conflicting claims. That somebody comes with a district level SC population of 20% and say, oh, this place is more than 30 or 35% scheduled caste population, and then some guy can come up with something that politically it doesn't show. So it's not same because we can't get that number if we go political. Next. The third point that I say is to me more spatial. So this is a map of Bombay. This is Bandra complex. This has been put together by a South African drone photographer. He actually did it across many cities of country. So as you can see, this shows the cohabitation of the plant and unplanned. That's not new. What's new in this thing that the guy is sitting in South Africa and he has to do a drone photography in India. So he probably needs some sort of first thing where he should go and it's an expensive exercise. He can't just take his drone throughout the city. But when he went to do that, he didn't get any spatial this thing that where Bombay slums are located. So he went to a project called Open Mumbai project, which happened in 2012, and this architect firm in Bombay called PK Das and company. They came up a map of slum, locations of Bombay. That helped him to focus into the area, and he comes together to plot this stark inequality that you are seeing in that sense. He was never been able to get that sort of information in any sort of government data set. Now come back to the issue of planning. Then when you think about policies being formed that this much of slums, we need this sort of housing development, this sort of in situ development in slums. Then to gain that you need strong bedrock of data, but unfortunately you don't have that sort of granular information at the level of the city. And that's what I got. The census just stops there. It gives you, so for example, I want to check the level of residential segregation in a city. And census stops you that 40% of Indian Muslims lives in urban areas, out of it 28% in large cities. It stops there. But even I'm interested in getting down to this. What is the situation? Our Muslims are actually segregated within those cities. I can't proceed further. There I get the absent data issue. Now my colleague, who in CPR he surveys some odd 3,350 houses of Delhi, and he found these red dots where Muslims are most segregated in Delhi. And I map that back to the various settlements of Delhi, and I get this big cluster of JJ cluster, Jhuggi Jhopri cluster slums where Muslims are mostly concentrated. So this multi-layer digging that I am doing here, I am stopping at the first stage of the government data, but I have to do a private survey to get that and link the spatial information back to get the actual reality of that thing. That's another form of data packetizing. So to sum up this, go ahead. I couldn't term it. It's deprivation, is apartheid, what you call is systematic failure, it's a human capacity issue. This letter that I am showing at the left, this is a letter that I received from Census of India when I asked for a particular piece of information. I asked them, can you give me migration numbers? Migration is one of the statistics that has been usually not been pointed in India. It's very important. We got our 2011 migration numbers just 3-4 months ago. Census 2011 migration numbers, right? So we are working for a committee, and Dr. Parth Mukhopadhyay was chairing it, and we asked them, we need a granular distinction of migration. Can you ask at least the sub-district level, Tehsil level, block level migration data? And they came us with this thing, and this particular box, I'm going to read it. This says The census office has already submitted a lot of results. This is absolutely blurred, but on migration. And the thing is that we can't provide you because we are busy in creating ACCC data and we are creating National Population Register. So we are doing 3-4 stuffs together. So we don't have really time to entertain you in that. So I don't know how to define it. It's a system capacity failure. You don't have human resources, and you are doing 3-4 collateral exercises that you can put together. That's an open question. So what you call inefficient informational infrastructure, that's a quote by this Lisa Bjorkman's seminal work on pipe politics in Bombay. We have a lot of technical progress, that's true, that Anand told, that's great. But Census of India, if you see our government data set over the time also narrowing domains. We have a lot of emphasis on technology over time. But we are also losing other part of government data. If you see old census monograph, you have excellent village studies. You have temple studies, you have monographs. Census stopped those things since 1981, you don't have those. On the other hand, I support technology, that's fine, we have digital data, we can easily, quickly access, but at the same time we are losing that part of the story. That's another probable thing that I want to highlight when we talk about data set. And then of course the politics and the selectivity around data, I'm not going to much talk about that, I think that will eventually come in the discussion. That which thing to take out first and which things to take out last, what to prioritize and what to not prioritize is a question of, again, these things. I want to stop here.
This is a website of Ministry of Commerce, and this is called the Commerce Dashboard, Commerce Analytics Dashboard. And what you see here is basically all the countries where Hyderabad is exporting pharma, exporting agriculture production. So what we are looking here is, what is Hyderabad essentially producing? Do we know it? Like, who knows the production of industrial production history or current production materials in Hyderabad? Where are the supply chains? I mean, onions. How many of you know where our onions are coming from? We know there's a crisis. They usually come from the Middle East. We import onions from Pakistan, we import onions from Turkey, we import onions from Egypt. So all of this interesting data is actually with the Customs Department. And they've been publishing this very granular data under a very old Customs Act. I think it's from 1862, the Sea and Customs Act, where they have to publish what is the manifest of the ship, where you get all the details of the ship and what's it bringing or taking away from the country. So, coming back to the production data, all of the data related to any tax data, any production data is with the tax authorities or it's with the central authority. With sales tax going, with GST coming in place, all of these data have been centralized. Like previously we used to have the problem of siloed data, where data is absent, you need to collect it, nobody knows where the data is. It's all being centralized. Now what we are seeing is the data is not being given back to the states. Centralization has its own set of issues and brings in its own set of politics. Now, coming back to the ownership of data. This database was shut down a week after demonetization. But I really thought it was because the government was trying to hide the numbers, but if you go actually look at the file, why the Customs Department shut it down, it's because businesses started claiming privacy, which is very strange. Some businesses in the country have licenses to import or export a particular brand of products. The data in itself did not have the list of businesses who were exporting or importing. It only had product details. Okay, it's probably not clear for you, but I'll explain what it is. It has the date, the port, the origin of the port, like country. This is the harmonized code. All the customs data, basically, it's an international thing, right? Trade is international, so every product has a single code. If you're exporting onions from Hyderabad, the US customs or the Indian customs will have the same code for onions. And the quantity of it, the units, whether it's metric tons, kgs, and the value of the trade, consumption. So this is the only data they will publish. This does not have any of the personal details, even for the businesses. But it so happened it had one more field with the description of the product. like right now I just showed you the code. It had the description. And interestingly, in this description, people used to put all sorts of things. They used to claim exemptions. Because you get tax exemptions if you're exporting textiles maybe, that 5% exemptions that you get. All of that is put into the descriptions. And you'll find that DRDO in Hyderabad or all of the defense laboratories importing sensors will say, oh, this is imported for defense use, so kindly exempt it. So you have all sorts of data which is both good and bad. And like when we're all talking about Rafale, right? Rafale is very political. We don't know how much it costs. We don't know when and what units of the Rafale are costing, what parts of it. But if you go actually look up this data set, you will find the cost of all the missiles which are manufactured by this very same entity when we import it from France. So it's a very interesting data set, and it got shut down. And now we are at the stage where the government is trying to bring this. They have a committee called the Non-Personal Data Framework Committee, which is going to look on how to bring out all of this non-personal data so that private companies can set up data businesses. There were actually a few private companies which were using this data to help build supply chains, and they were all shut once the data was shut in 2016. The reason I'm telling you all the politics of it is data is toxic, data is beneficial. It depends on how you look at it. If you look at it from the national security establishment, they are like, oh, this is bad data. But the US actually publishes all of its defense imports and exports. The level of transparency that data brings, the promise of data is only great if people are actually using it for policy. But with centralization, what you're seeing is it's just a promise, and all we have is apartheid where we don't know what's happening with data. It's in fact probably being used to profile us, to separate us, to probably take away our rights. And we have been through all of this in Telangana where we had our own NPR, where our voting rights have been taken away with Aadhaar. It's deeply political, and a lot of people do not understand the consequences of it. And I think more people can look insights from it, but at the same time look towards the human side of it, right? It's simply not a machine thing.
Hi, my name is Harsha. I'm a reporter, data reporter with Mint, a business newspaper based in Delhi. So, because I'm a reporter, I'm obligated to write things for the public. So, a lot of my work, I hope you find relevant to your lives. When was the last time any of you saw a map of your city in a paper? Like, I mean, we've seen maps of India, we've seen maps of where our cities are located in India. But when was the last time a newspaper around you carried a map of a city with, let's say, issues highlighting that's relevant to your city? Alright, you've seen a map. If you've seen any local press, like if some of you are from Hyderabad, Enadu does these things where, like when dumpsters catch fire, they put like a cute map and they put dumpster garbage icons, and they say this is where all dumpsters caught fire. But apart from that, a lot of Indian media still doesn't handle data in the way I suppose the potentials. I mean, I don't think we handle data in the way it should be handled. So I'm going to quickly talk about how, as a reporter, I've had access to data, scraps of data in this country. Anybody who's worked with data in India will tell you that A, you're lucky if you have data, B, you're lucky if the data is clean, C, you're lucky if they let you use that data and you don't get into trouble. So as a reporter, I want to live, I don't want to die. So when we have to report on things, we have to make sure that all those three things are true, and that when we report on the data, as a reporter, I have to be objective, which is the promise of data, that I will lead us to some objective truth. So recently I did a series called Life in Metros, where my editor tells me that, okay, your challenge is do 10 large full-page stories on life in Indian cities using publicly available free data. So I said no, because I thought that was ridiculous. Because A, I'm a single person. B, anybody who's worked with data will tell you that one person can literally never do anything. And he said the series has to be largely driven with maps. And I said, no, you don't understand. Data in India is really hard to get. For those of you who are unfamiliar, most data in India, if it's provided by the government, is not spatial. By not spatial, I mean you don't get maps of it. They give you Excel spreadsheets like the one Srinivas just showed. You get data like this. You can't link this to a map. Well, I mean you can, but it's a lot of hard work. So I tell my editor that I don't want to do this. He said, no, you have to do this. So let me just quickly show you what is possible with the scraps of data that we have in India. Just to show you, just to show you the possibilities of data with the little we have. We don't have a lot of good data in India. Anybody who's worked with data will tell you that. And a lot of this work is possible because of all the wonderful people, some of whom are in this room, who are continuously trying their best to make sure that data is accessible, clean, and available for reporters like me to use. So there's Srinivas, there's Ratnam, there's a lot of other people whose names I'm not taking. Why? Sorry. So for one of my first stories, actually let me just show you the funny maps. So one of the first stories I did was to look at coverage of metro networks in Indian cities. Like if you know, a lot of Indian cities are obsessed with building metro trains. And transportation researchers have argued that the metro is not necessarily a fit-all solution, that we don't have the money to build like these massive networks. Except for Delhi, maybe no other Indian city can afford to build a network that big. So we were trying to make an argument. So where I used, that's the current network of Delhi Metro, those black lines you see there. And on the base map is the population density map of Delhi. And I put like these green buffers around it. And I calculated what percentage of the population lives less than a kilometer away from a metro station. I wouldn't want to walk more than a kilometer to a metro station. And I found out that only 44% of Delhi's population lives close to a metro station. And Delhi has like a 350 kilometer metro network, which is amongst the longest in the world. So no other Indian city will be this lucky. So if you look at other cities, like Chennai or Hyderabad, like Hyderabad almost, this is Chennai. Hyderabad, 75% of the city's population lives away from a metro station. This is numbers that NVS Reddy would not be happy. Sorry if you're here. But the fact of the matter is, the argument that we were building is that cities were to provide equitable transport to people. They can't rely on the metro alone as a solution. And this map managed to convince a lot more people on the restriction, on the limitations of metro as a mode of transport. We're not saying it's bad, we're saying it's great, but it's expensive. And anybody who's familiar with the finances of Indian cities will tell you that Indian cities don't have money to build fancy projects like this. So we have to probably invest in bus networks, but the thing is, it's a solution that is hard. Whereas a metro is an easy solution. You don't have to address traffic. You build a metro pillar, people can keep riding their cars, the plebeians can take the train. So, so this is one of the stories that we did with data mostly available publicly. But one other story that I want to show is a story that we did on we were just talking about segregation in Indian cities. So for one of the things that we did was to link the census SC/ST population data with the ward boundary files of a city to look at where are SC/ST ghettos in these 6 metros of India. So this is actually a replication of a 2015 paper, but the paper did not have maps. It was called Spatial Patterns of Residential Segregation in Indian Cities. It did not have maps, and that irked me a lot because I wanted to see which parts of the cities there were ghettos where SC/ST residents would primarily live. So this is the map of Chennai. I don't know if you're familiar. This is like Mylapore, T Nagar. There are no SC/ST people living there. So this idea of an Agraharam, or like a very Brahminical neighborhood that we think and we say, there's actually proof that it's real. That there are parts of this. So in this map, wherever there are dark green colors, those are neighborhoods with a higher percentage of SC/ST population. So we like to think that cities are places where people, shed their caste. But the thing is, we're replicating those exact same patterns of, like Dr. Ambedkar had said, that you have to escape the village if you want to escape caste. But the thing is, even within the city, we found a way to re-establish those patterns of segregation. So this is Chennai. One of the cool things about this map is this is a election ward level map. This is this is a ward map, which is a ward usually has about 20 to 40,000 people approximately. And if you notice that the wards with the highest SC/ST population are all along the railway lines. So while this is good that like for an Indian city you can finally look at and say this is where SC/ST people live. So you can use this knowledge to plan cities that are not as segregated as this. But the thing is, this is not enough. There's actually a latest paper that's come out last year on looking at enumeration block level data. So they found out that even within a ward, there are smaller pockets of ghettos where upper caste residents live versus lower caste residents live. So the point of us having access to data is to talk about things like this. For example, this is a very cool map. Kolkata is surprisingly highly segregated. 1/3 of Kolkata's SC/ST population just lives in these 4 or 5 wards. I mean, Kolkata does not have like a lot of SC/ST population within its municipal limits, but those who do live are very segregated. Like for those of you who are familiar with Bombay, most of Bombay's SC/ST population is in the M ward, which is not a surprise for people who work there. But the fact is, this is data, this is the possibilities of what data, or this is the possibilities of reporting with data. All this is done with data that was released like 6 years ago. And the fact that it took us 6 years to produce something like this in a paper tells you where we are in journalism. So we're not saying we can do miracles. We're trying our best in doing what we can with the data. And I'm not going to lie about this, but it was a lot of effort to put this together. It was at least 6 people's effort to put together these maps. And the fact that my editor gave me no choice was the only reason these maps are possible. A lot of sleepless nights. But let me just talk about one last story. So this one's green spaces. So for this, we didn't use the census data. We used Google Earth Engine to look at where are India's greenest wards. So the idea was to identify green cover and then look at the population of the ward in 2019 and then calculate how green a neighborhood is. Like some of the larger wards usually are greener because they have like a big lake or a big forest but not too much population. The point is if you all of us want to live in a city where there's like a lot of trees, it's a lot of green, it's healthy. So we looked at municipal, this is green cover per person in Indian cities. So that's Delhi. Old Delhi is clearly congested. So there are a lot of cool maps, so please follow this on livewith.com, plug-in by my employer. But the point of the series was to figure out how can we use the existing limited data we have to talk about issues that are relevant to all of us. And the thing is, a lot of us are still very disconnected from the data that the government produces. Anybody who's worked with data will tell you India has a very robust statistical, a bunch of statistical institutions that provide really great data sets. We've just not had the culture of us engaging with data. So, so if next time you guys want to see something or you guys want to know how a city functions spatially, just come up and hit me up and I'll try probably reporting on it so you guys can read about it. But one final thing I'd like to talk about stats in India is India is currently going through a major statistical crisis. The current ruling party is dismantling a lot of institutions that have generated wonderful statistical artifacts over the years. One such artifact is one such institution is the NSO. The NSO produces a lot of wonderful reports that help reporters like me and researchers like several in this room to understand the state of our country as it is right now. Our current ruling government currently discarded a report called the Consumption Survey Report of 2017-18 because they junked it even though the parliamentary committee on the committee said it should not be junked. They junked it, and my editor and I were curious to find out why. So then we replicated the 2011-12 Tendulkar poverty line committee estimates on the 2017-18 data, and we found out that poverty levels have gone up for the first time in at least 30-40 years. So in 2017-18, rural poverty levels have shot up, urban poverty levels have fallen down a little bit, but overall there are more poorer people in India in 2017-18 than 2011-12 estimates. So the real reason for the government junking a very obscure report is that they're afraid of the truth. And if data is helping us tell the truth, I think we should all be invested in making sure data is accessible, available, and clean and transparent for all of us to use. Thanks.
Data sets. Who is doing what, who is releasing it, and how much we can trust. And then what I think was saying is, if it is about trusting data, and if the data is from one source and we know what that is happening with it, then what do we do about it? The 2-3 examples that I wanted to talk about was from the work that we do, or the reading was when we say that the first question anybody who's working with data and about what about the data is where people live, how do they live, what are they doing, and how do they function on a day-to-day basis. So for example, the only representation possible is like what Harsha was also showing is about boundaries, for example. At least I think, and a lot of people that I know think that boundaries doesn't make any sense. In terms of administratively, you don't decide if you're this side of that and the other side of the boundary, it doesn't matter, you just find ways to this, and representation itself is an issue there. But that's the only way that we have, so we wanted to go and see that, say, okay, what do we do where people live? It's not just about cities, there are also places. So village, I think, is the least boundary that we have. So if we have to go and, let's say, for example, find where village boundaries are, there is no one public government approved data set that we have in this country. And if you have to buy from Survey of India, I think the estimate is about 45 lakh rupees you have to pay to get a digital data. Otherwise, in Survey of India, there are maps which can show you village boundaries, but if you put two states together, they don't match. But if you go to Harvard or Stanford, there is a data set that is available because somebody was willing to pay that 45 lakhs or how much it is, or somebody, we know that, and we only know that in this country, Survey of India is the only organization that is allowed to make any of these boundaries. And then the other side of it is when you talk about trusting this is because Supreme Court has recently asked Survey of India to go and check its boundaries in the border of Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. Because you must have heard about this, the mining scam that is happening, and then the person used it to his advantage to say, okay, I'm following some rules here, some rules there, and we don't know what it is. So he then they asked the government, is that you tell me where the mine is, then you can tell me if it is illegal or not, and the government did have to say whether it is illegal or legal or not. So one side of it, Survey of India is been there for 250 years doing all of this and selling data to some people which are outside the country, and nobody in the country have access to this. And then the second side of it is, if somebody goes and asks, okay, you tell me as a government institution to say where the boundary is, they will say, okay, we don't know what it is, and there is, I think, work happening at this point to draw the boundary between Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. Telangana to, sorry, I'm still used to it. So this is the first thing. The second thing is when, let's say for example, we went to, we were commissioned for a study, we wanted to get, everybody knows that, okay, there is an issue with departments talking to each other, not talking to each other, the centralization, decentralization of data, everybody is holding together. So we said, we went to a few cities and started asking for data sets. So some cities said, if you have something, please give us. We don't have any data for us. And then we found some places where, there are these consultants which have been publishing reports. So we said, there is some data. So when we went to ask the city government, they said they didn't give us they gave us a CD, but because we didn't release the last payment, that guy, the consultant came us and he knows where CD is, he broke it and left. So the data that government paid for it has been with the consultant. And because we didn't release the last payment, the data is not with us. It's in the reports. And the third one is we went to the Census of India again. I said, okay, the city doesn't have it, the consultant has it, but we can't go to the consultant and like give me the data set. So we went and asked cities like, Census of India, like give us ward boundaries. So government, the census said, okay, I will ask for these census boundaries from the state offices and you come back in a few days. When we went and they said, we asked for Mumbai and Navi Mumbai ward boundaries, and the Census of India offices, they didn't give us. Like they refused to give us the data. So it's about, I don't know who is sharing with what and who is willing to share with what. Is it consultant, private, public, and government to other universities? I don't know what, I mean, I clearly can't put, but what I generally tell about is because my work or our work is there because the other people's works are incomplete at this point, and we only are making livelihood because other people have just released a ward boundary in a PDF, and then we just have to go do more work to complete that process and put a spatial boundary. And the second part of it, what I wanted to say was, if you have to trust this, I think that like when we started this day about doing an imagination of what it should be, I don't think we are in a place where we can just trust the one source. And I think Srinivas also had written about a lot of it, and in all of the panels, it's about having a value or other things in terms of having a parallel system that can question each other. Otherwise, what I think he also talked about is the triangulation. If there is no triangulation, if there is no thing, then you can't just be trusting. And that, especially that is very valid in the current day context, is that the thing that I wanted to share.
Thank you. So I'm going to take 5 minutes and we'll also close the panel and go for lunch. First of all, thanks to all of you. I'm also just, so I'm more of a generalist rather than people who are actually qualified to work with data and so on and so on. So I'm coming more from that point of view. Many points have been raised, and I had got 3-4 things out of which at least 2 have been covered. One is, of course, the data, public data especially that is available is a deeply contestable at source. I've had an experience in which while speaking to an MLA of a sort of a constituency in Tamil Nadu, where he explained that where people were like, but sir, your census data says so and so. The guy was like, but who does the census? My school teachers, right? Okay, so you might have heard about the penciling of census and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of issues in the data, and but very interestingly, since we started, I work a lot with government in terms of state governments particularly, in terms of trying to understand data, in terms of trying to extract data. And speaking to this question of apartheid or poverty, I guarantee you that is the same condition inside the government as well. So they don't know. They really don't know. They don't have it. They've hidden it somewhere. Consultant has stolen it, or somebody or some other department has it. So you keep running between one and the other to serve their purpose only. Basically, what you end up doing is that, and one is so tempted because you end up putting the effort to actually collect data from various sources, and then you sort of clean it, you parse it, you sort of go through it, and you sort of start making some sense of it. You feel they don't actually deserve it. I'm going to keep it. So that really, so it's really an intrinsic sort of a system sort of an issue over here. But also the government is, and I'm sort of being very particular about this, that you must break the government down into its constituent parts when you talk about data. Whether it is departmental or hierarchical, or whether it is political government versus administrative government, there's a whole, it's a whole city unto itself in that sense. So you know, and what data sits with who is like always a consideration. And very often, for example, if a housing department will say that, oh, the social welfare department data is crap, or the social welfare guys will say, oh, that slum-free city plan, actually, no, they just don't know, they didn't get it right, and whatever. So even in terms of, and this is really one of the things that I came across, that, for example, there was something called a socio-economic and caste census, which was done with great fanfare, but the data was never actually released. And I believe the government, at least we were working with state of Karnataka at that time, and I believe the government, when they actually told us the reason for that was that the framing of the questions itself were like not very good.
Well, my reply from census says industry walking.
Yeah, so yeah, which means that they're redoing the questions right now, I suppose. anyway, but let's leave that aside. So let's leave that aside. Let's move to the next thing, which is connected a couple of things, which is that so whether it's an apartheid or poverty, I think there is a new opportunity and new freedom being created exactly because of this. If I say that there is less data in India, I'd be like wrong. There is a huge amount of data. It is not in the public sector, it's not in the development sector, but it's in the corporate sector. It is getting generated every day, massive amounts. It's in the political parties. There's a massive amount of data that is being generated, and we need to basically get onto the same paradigm of thinking. We have to start generating our data ourselves. We have to sort of get that money, do those surveys, find out, frame it. We have to do this because in a sense, what I consider to be the other already has that data and is already using it to like really drastic effects. So it is in fact a different kind of a freedom, maybe a more resistant kind of a freedom, but it is something that we need to do ourselves, and that's something I strongly sort of believe in because the next level of what is happening, what I believe is going to happen more in the future, is something that really interests me, particularly as a generalist. I'm not a data scientist, but particularly a generalist, is a lot of government data and public data tends to be or leads to a more deterministic sort of way of thinking, that here is the answer to this statistical problem, here is how to solve a policy issue, and so on and so forth. It leads to that. While the real use of data now is going into and I know this from first hand after seeing some corporate data that we sort of ran across, is growing into probabilistic models, which are far more predictive and far more capable of actually capturing more emotive, more softer things basically, and that actually will change decision making at an individual, collective and collective kind of a level. So we need to get onto this. We need to get our act together and move on to places where we stop looking at data as a static thing and start moving into more predictive, probabilistic kind of a ways. And this is something that I sort of strongly sort of feel about that if there is a big risk basically if you don't generate our own data and move into this. It sort of speaks to a certain extent to the panel before us, basically, where Prasad and Mukta were also speaking about what is a deterministic plan that I have a 2035, I will reach here, versus what actually happens on ground. And so you end up with essentially very deterministic islands inside like probabilistic kind of seas. And so we really need to be able to work across both and more, as the climate change scientists will tell you, the sea is rising. So we really need to work on probabilistic data. So those are 2-3 points.
To some of the discussions that we had. So, well, I think I'm the only person in this panel who's questioning the toxicity of data. Right? I mean, we're this juncture where there's a new data protection law which is coming out. There's new surveys, National Population Register, Survey of India, trying to probably do the Delimitation Commission, part of the Delimitation Commission, mapping new constituencies in 2026. So the question to ask now is, who should have access to data? Right? Like, private sector is indeed collecting a lot of data. If you've been following the New York Times articles in the past 2 days, you would see that they have tracked President Trump everywhere, right? Wherever Trump was, like there are these 2 interesting articles in New York Times yesterday and the day before that, where they could track everyone inside the Pentagon, everywhere in New York. They could actually pinpoint with them dots, right? Your phone is actually collecting all of this information. The question is, who should have access to it? And when you see the whole issue with NRC and the citizenship bill right now, I've been having this discussion with a lot of people right after 2019 election. What is the threat vector? Clearly government is a threat to civil rights and fundamental rights these days. Is what portfolio would Mr. Shah get and what would happen? Everybody thought finance minister and was like, oh, he's going to become the home minister, he's going to do the National Population Register, he's going to use all of this data to reconstitute our voter constituencies, use NPR data for voter profiling, and in fact, he's done this in Gujarat. If you actually go back and look at his history, he was part of the Delimitation Commission in Gujarat. And I'm actually stating a lot of this based on our own understanding of what happened in Hyderabad and Andhra Pradesh. When we had our own voter profiling incidents where voters couldn't vote in Telangana in 2018 December elections. And you must understand the Gujarat model is the AP model. This is something which people have been ignoring for a lot of time, and since you're back in Hyderabad, I want to put this out, is what will these institutions, both the statistical institutions, the Survey of India, the Office of the Registrar General of India, what will be they doing with all of this data? And when we talk about the socio-economic caste census, they actually have something called the National Social Registry, which they're working with the World Bank, where the Department of Rural Development is like, oh, we'll collect all the data. And we'll all centralize it so that we can give a lot of benefits back to people. You know what, who has done this? Telangana. Telangana has built its own database, its own Aadhaar database, gave everybody a state ID, state resident ID, and never told us. And we were having these discussions, yes, so this has been done, but we don't know what it's called. And finally, you know it is part of the economic survey of 2018-19. Oh, Telangana has done this and the government is praising it. Well, nobody in the state knows that the government has actually done it. The state is increasingly collecting a lot of information about us and using it in ways which we don't know. And when we talk about the National Population Register, the National Population Register data was shared to multiple states and it was used to deduplicate voters. And you see the 2019 elections where voters couldn't vote, it was all because of this. The election commission is involved in it. Each of these independent institutions are using data in ways that we can't even imagine. And I had to put that out.
Telling the truth.
Which is enabling the government to do it, right? Nandan Nilekani built, Nandan Nilekani built all of this. Okay, I'm going to blame him as much as Mr. Shah for it. But at the end, we are stuck with it.
ACCC had more than 70,000 individual caste names. And Census, Election Commission of India, they give you polling booth-wise turnouts. I'm just talking about probabilities, I don't know what is happening. So, you know from the ACCC actually, if you have this access to the unit level data which government has, one can actually match it to the booths and know how many people of different castes and religions actually, and by caste I'm not talking SC/STs. SC/ST is a very gross, coarse category. By caste you have Jadavs, you have Kodis, you have Jatavs, lots of, I shouldn't talk. But the thing is that now marking that voting pattern with the caste database gives enough scope for predictability to the state that where I am, successful calculation given where I am backward by 25%, and a little change of the boundary can lead to the change of that number. I don't know what's happening, but it's possible. I mean, at the same time, that's why I always say that this concealing of data is a ticking time bomb. I mean, put it out to the analysts, put it out to people of the skill who can have it, and then people know. And this sort of taking it away from public domain and not putting it out gives rise to a lot of speculations, a lot of probabilities that gets out of the bound over time.